Hello and welcome to a conversation with Make UK looking at business travel to the EU and why it's important for companies to check before they go. In this session, we'll be looking at some of the risks and ramifications. And today I'm joined by my colleagues Nicola and my colleague Jenny, and we're going to look at why it's important for companies to check before they go. Nicola, over to you.
Thanks, Fergus. So I think the main question that people want to know is, what happens if they don't have the right paperwork? What's the worst that can happen?
Nicola, a good question, and really getting to the root of the issue. I think what's important to understand is that the relationship with the EU has changed, and now in terms of commercial and business activity, the Trade and Cooperation sets out the rules and requirements. There are individual rules and requirements in individual countries, so you really do have to look at the country you're traveling to and the activity you're undertaking. But it's important for companies to understand that the freedom of movement no longer exists, and that when you're traveling, you will have to justify your entry to a country. That means that you will be confronted with a border guard, and you will have to answer the questions of the border guard honestly, and they will, depending on the answers, grant you access to that country or not. So in the scenario where you haven't got the right information with you, it's quite possible the border guard will stop you and refuse you entry to that country. So at one level, that's an issue which companies need to be ready for. Making sure you have the right paperwork, you have a pack with you, and you're fulfilling all your obligations. Otherwise, you'll be turned away. That's one level of risk.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you're turned away and you don't have the correct paperwork, are there any other kind of ramifications for the business or even for your clients?
Yeah, Jenny, absolutely. So as I said, that's the first risk really, is that you won't be able to enter the country, you won't be able to undertake the activity. But it's important to understand that there are risks for three parties, if you will. So the company who is sending an individual to the EU might be liable for fines or penalties because they've got the information wrong. You also need to consider that the company that your customer or your client, where you're sending individuals to, might also be liable. If you are in breach, for example, of the local labour law of the country that you're working in, not just you as the employer, but the site on which your employee is working will also bear responsibility, and they may be subject to a fine. And finally, it's important to understand that the individual could be affected. So, for example, if an individual employee is traveling, if they don't get that information right, that can have serious ramifications for them in the future.
Okay. And a lot of our customers talk to us about SLAs that they currently have in their contracts around obviously needing to be on client sites within the EU relatively quickly. And we've talked already about kind of longer lead times. What would you say to Make UK members about that?
Yeah, I think it's important that companies understand that the commercial relationships with European customers will have changed at the beginning of this year. So it's really important to understand and review your contractual obligations to your customers in Europe, particularly on your service level agreements, and understanding that the time frame in order to be able to service those contracts might be longer, but also there could be additional costs. So if the activity requires you to apply for a work permit or a visa, you need to understand that that will add cost to that process, but it'll also add time. So really important to review that and to understand how that will have an impact on servicing your customers and clients in Europe. So really important to review those and to consider that in the future, that this could cost more and could take longer depending on the activity which you're undertaking and the country you're traveling to.
Thanks, Fergus. So the underlying message for all types of European travel would be check before you go for the country you're visiting.
Absolutely. So, Nicola, really important to understand that there is a distinction between traveling and the ability to travel and the ability to carry out work. If you are deemed to be carrying out work, you'll need to fulfill the obligations of the individual country you're traveling to. And if you're traveling to multiple countries, you'll need to fulfill the obligations in those countries. So traveling to France and Germany, understand the rules for your work in France, and understand that they may be different to the rules for the work and activity you're undertaking in Germany. So really important to check before you go, really important to understand that the types of work you're doing and the country you're traveling to will be the starting point. So understand that, mapping that activity, understanding your contracts so that you know how often your employees are expected to travel, that you have worked with your customers and clients in Europe to understand the potential impact in this change in relationship, and understanding that each country will have its own set of requirements, and starting from that process, checking before you go. It's important to do so because the risk here is not just borne by the company, the employer, but it's also borne by the employee. And should an individual be subject to visa controls and they haven't got that right, it could impact future visa-free travel for that individual. And that would have an impact not just on business travel, but on their personal travel as well. So as an employer, really important to understand that the liability here could be on the individual as well. And also, as a company, it's important to understand that your customer or your client is also going to bear a risk if this isn't done correctly. So Nicola, absolutely right. Check before you go. Make UK has a number of services which we can help companies in that journey, but really important to map that data first to understand how and often your employees are traveling, what sort of activity that they're undertaking, and the countries they're traveling to. But we at Make UK can help companies with that and ensure that they fulfill all of their obligations. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Fergus.